Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Transform Enterprise IT Infrastructure with AWS DevOps. My name is Michael Miller. I'm a Partner Solutions Architect with Amazon Web Services. I'll be presenting today along with Seth Paskin, Solutions Marketing Manager for BMC Software, Inc., and Dennis Sherman, Director of Cloud Infrastructure with NICE InContact. So for today's agenda, first we'll provide a brief overview of DevOps on AWS, including best practices. Second, a presentation on a fully visible cloud with BMC TrueSight. Third, how NICE InContact uses BMC and AWS to transform their enterprise IT. And finally, we'll wrap up with your questions. In terms of learning objectives, we want you to understand the why and how of using a DevOps model. That includes managing complex infrastructure environments, including hybrid environments with both on-prem and cloud resources. We'll talk about employing microservices and containers, and also how to get unified visibility across your environments using AWS Cloud and BMC TrueSight, if you're operating entirely in the cloud or in a hybrid environment. Again, I'm Michael. I work closely with the AWS Partner Network Program, or APN, which provides technical, business, and marketing support to the AWS partner community. That community includes system integrators as well as independent software vendors, or ISVs, like BMC. So diving right in, traditional development models are obsolete. Software is changing the way we do business, and users have higher expectations, both in terms of their immediate experience with products, but also higher expectations in terms of reliability and security. Meeting those expectations requires provisioning your resources and applications quickly and reliably. And that's important because your customers will only be able to experience your rate of innovation if you can push out applications and infrastructure quickly and at scale. This is where DevOps plays a vital role. At AWS, we talk about DevOps as a combination of three factors: cultural philosophies, practices, and tools. When you bring these three factors together, they increase the velocity of your organization. This means you can evolve and improve products at a faster rate than organizations that use traditional software development processes. And that speed means you can compete more effectively in the market. There are four primary best practices with DevOps: infrastructure as code, microservices, logging and monitoring, and CI/CD, or continuous integration and continuous delivery. Underlying all of these is greater communication and collaboration, which is at the heart of DevOps. Infrastructure as code is a practice where infrastructure is provisioned and managed using code. Because it's a code-based model, it means your developers and system admins can interact with infrastructure programmatically, and that becomes particularly important as your environment scales. Infrastructure as code also means you can use techniques like version control and continuous integration for your infrastructure. And because your engineers are interfacing with the infrastructure using code, they can deploy servers and applications quickly. The next practice is microservices. Microservices is a design approach where you build a single application from a set of smaller services. Each service runs in its own process and communicates with the other services through lightweight APIs, or application programming interfaces. Microservices architecture is a design approach to build a single application as a set of smaller services. Typically, microservices are built around a business capability, and each service is scoped to a single purpose. Microservices also give a lot of flexibility, since you can use different frameworks and programming languages to write services and deploy them independently. Logging and monitoring. Active monitoring becomes increasingly important as you deploy services that must be available 24/7, and also as you update your applications and infrastructure more frequently. This includes creating alerts and performing real-time analysis of data. By capturing, categorizing, and then analyzing data and logs from your applications and infrastructure, you can understand how changes impact your users and also shed light on the root cause of problems or unexpected changes. The fourth best practice is CI/CD, or continuous integration and continuous delivery. Continuous integration is a software development practice where developers regularly merge their code into a central repo, which then triggers an automated build. The purpose of continuous integration is to improve software quality and reduce the time it takes to both validate and deploy your solutions. Continuous delivery expands on continuous integration by deploying changes to environments, including both pre-production and production environments after the build stage. When continuous delivery is properly implemented, developers always have a deployment-ready build artifact that has passed a standardized testing process. The end result is the ability to rapidly and reliably build, test, and deploy your applications, while at the same time improving quality and reducing time to market. The benefits of DevOps on AWS include automating system operations. AWS helps you automate so you can build faster and more efficiently. It means you can automate manual tasks or processes such as deployment and test workflows, container management, and configuration management. Another benefit is pay-as-you-go. At AWS, you pay for services as you need them, and only for the period when you plan to use them. AWS pricing has no upfront fees, termination penalties, or long-term contracts. 3, improve security. You have granular control over who can access your resources and how they access those services using IAM, or AWS Identity and Access Management. You can use IAM to set user permissions and policies. 4, take advantage of fully managed services. These services help you use AWS services more quickly, so you can worry less about setting up, installing, and operating infrastructure, and focus more on building your core product. 5, AWS is built for scale. You can manage a single instance or scale to thousands using AWS services. These services help you make the most of flexible compute resources by simplifying provisioning, configuration, and scaling. AWS Shared Responsibility Model. Security and compliance is a shared responsibility between AWS and the customer. The shared model can help relieve customers' operational burden as AWS operates, manages, and controls the components from the host operating system and virtualization layer down to the physical security of facilities in which the service operates. APN partners, like BMC, help customers meet their part of the shared responsibility model. In the model, customers assume responsibility and management of the guest operating system, including updates and security patches, while the associated application software, as well as the configuration of the AWS-provided security firewall. As shown in the chart, this differentiation of responsibility is commonly referred to as security of the cloud versus security in the cloud. AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud, that is, protecting the infrastructure that runs all the services offered in the AWS cloud. This infrastructure is composed of the hardware, software, networking, and facilities that run AWS cloud services. Customers are responsible for security in the cloud. Customer responsibility is determined by the AWS cloud services that a customer selects. This determines the amount of configuration work the customer must perform as part of their security responsibilities. For example, services such as Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud, or Amazon EC2, Amazon Virtual Private Cloud, or Amazon VPC, and Amazon S3 are categorized as infrastructure as a service, and as such, require the customer to perform all the necessary security configuration management tasks. This shared responsibility model also extends to IT controls. Just as the responsibility to operate the IT environment is shared between AWS and its customers, so is the management, operation, and verification of IT controls shared. One of the great things about cloud is that AWS customers inherit all the best practices of AWS policies, architecture, and operational processes built to satisfy the requirements of our most security-sensitive customers. AWS is certified to have met a number of standards and certifications. Here's a list of key bodies that have either certified AWS or that have a workbook of guidance showing you how to validate an AWS environment against these standards. For more details, check out aws.amazon.com/compliance. And now Seth Passman with BMC Software will lead you through BMC TrueSight.
Thank you, Michael. Let's go ahead and so I want to spend just a moment and introduce BMC for anybody who's on the call who isn't aware of who we are. BMC has been in business for almost 40 years. We have been helping customer IT operations transform to meet changing market and technology needs over that period of time, including moving from the mainframe to distributed computing to virtualization, virtualization to cloud, cloud to microservices. We considered our mission to help customers manage, change, and transform their business. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of the market situation. Michael's told you sort of how AWS helps you transform your business using DevOps, and Dennis is going to follow this, talking about specifically how NICE InContact has done that. But really, I want to talk about the market situation and this transformation, digital transformation that that businesses are facing is a huge opportunity. There's massive turnover. The stability in markets, the disruption that's happening as businesses go digital is enormous. And so the opportunity to go and be a disruptor is huge. And by the same token, if your organization is not willing to take the steps or unable to successfully take the steps to transform, you're likely to become one of the ones who gets disrupted. And so it's really, there's no choice at this point but to engage with it. But the good news is that AWS is there to help. And the other part of the equation is that in addition to customers facing the shift from transformation to adopt AWS, the reality is that organizations in the distributed format are doing this already. So we've seen research, right? We know that public cloud and AWS adoption is going to double, and in some cases we've seen reports where it might even triple over the next 5 to 10 years. But we also have a lot of research that suggests that organizations within or groups within enterprise organizations are already doing that. So there's estimates that even if you as an IT operations organization aren't consciously aware or are putting in plans to transform, there's likely groups, DevOps groups, lines of business inside of your organization that are already leveraging AWS and external public cloud services. So the time to transform is now, not just because of the opportunity, but probably because other people in your organization are already doing it. Okay, so let's talk about the positive opportunities that are associated with digital transformation. Organizations that digitally transform as opposed to those that don't, they're 3 times more likely to meet the business goals that have been set out for them. And that's not just because they successfully, in a traditional sense, support the business needs, but because as IT transforms and becomes digital, it is the business. So business alignment is not simply in a traditional IT cost center support mode. It's because IT is delivering the transformation itself. It becomes the business. And that's why alignment and awareness and business awareness is so critical. As you'll hear Dennis talk about in a minute, transformational enterprises are also twice as likely to successfully penetrate new markets, particularly as you go global and move into new regions. And if, as opposed to businesses that stay 100% on premises, customers that are transformational enterprises see a 90% higher return on their investment than enterprises that stay completely on premises. So you're going to hear a lot more about these in just a minute from Dennis, but talking about transformational strategies, Michael mentioned some of the core tenets of DevOps practices, but from a perspective of enterprise, thinking about the transformation journey to AWS from traditional service delivery models. There's a choice or decisions about lifting and shifting workloads, traditional workloads, as opposed to refactoring those workloads and building cloud native services to interact with the traditional enterprise applications. It's, as Michael mentioned, as Dennis will talk about, it's adopting DevOps continuous integration and continuous delivery model that still integrates seamlessly with the parts of the business that you maintain continuity on and are running still to run your business. There's a new paradigm in understanding both capacity management, but also cost cloud expense management as you move to cloud, because you have a different pricing, different costing models. A critical need to implement automation, both at the front end and the back end of your services. So Michael talked about instrumenting infrastructure as code, and then there's also automated response and remediation features with respect to issue response, compliance, vulnerability management, and so forth. And then being able to do performance assurance by maintaining service continuity, and that service continuity requires understanding the service context across your new cloud services as well as your traditional services delivered through your enterprise, which are likely connected. The transformation is not something that happens overnight. It's not something that happens overnight, and it's not something that happens in a vacuum. The native cloud services that you build are going to tie back to your systems of record that are managing the critical parts of your ongoing business concerns. So TrueSight as a platform is designed, we've built it over time to support that, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. The journey that you hear from NICE InContact is typical in some respects of how we interact with our customers and unique in others. But essentially, TrueSight is a platform that's designed to support a broad range of critical monitoring, response, and automation capabilities across both the data center that's on premises, on private clouds, and then also AWS. So we have a broad suite of management capabilities that span those different service delivery models. And we do that to create a unified view that allows you to see both your AWS and your data center assets in a single place, perform monitoring, event management, root cause analysis, response in a single pane of glass. And we do this all by creating deep and meaningful service and application contexts that allow you to manage from your business service down as opposed from your assets up. In terms of, and that service model context is definitely part of our differentiation. So it's one of the core tenets that we believe is critical for enterprises that transform. It's the ability to create meaningful business and service context to align with those business and service goals as IT transforms and actually delivers the business via these new innovative AWS cloud services. And at the same time, maintaining the heritage IT infrastructure that is running the business and maintaining continuity of operations for that. And to do that, of course, requires a wide variety of automation and analytics techniques that you will see. Dennis will talk about somewhat here in a minute. So with that, there we go. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Dennis. And I just want to say one thing about the relationship that BMC and NICE InContact have. So Dennis is going to talk about NICE InContact's transformation journey. And in many respects, BMC have been on a transformation journey with him and with NICE InContact. So they're more than just a client of ours. We consider them to be a strategic partner and a development partner. So a lot of the learnings that he's going to talk about and the strategies that he employed informed the way that we transform our own business. And we see that same kind of transformation happening across the board. So we have a very strong relationship with NICE InContact, and we consider them to be paradigmatic in some respects for how you can successfully digitally transform to take a leading position in your market space. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dennis.
Hey, thanks, Seth, and thanks, Michael. Appreciate the introduction. Once again, my name is Dennis Sherman, and I'm the Director of Cloud Infrastructure at NICE InContact. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about us as a company. NICE InContact is the global leader in cloud contact center software, and that's not opinion. That's according to Gartner, who has rated NICE InContact as the leader in the cloud contact center space for the last 3 years. NICE InContact today has more than 250,000 agents operating worldwide, running our solutions worldwide, and our customers operate in more than 100 countries today. We recognize 85 of the Fortune 100 as our customers, and we're the only company in our space that has a contractual guarantee of 4 nines uptime. And we've reached these milestones and are continuously growing and innovating to help our customers achieve all their goals. What makes us the global leader, though, in cloud contact center software is we provide all the tools necessary for a complete customer experience in a single platform. We have the complete solution of voice, workforce optimization, analytics, and automation, and that's all in one tool, one service delivery platform. We also have very versatile scaling. We have versatile pay options, pay for what you use. So this is a true cloud solution, and it's been very accessible and amenable to our customers. And as you can imagine, offering all these capabilities and doing it in an international or global scale introduces a lot of challenges and opportunities, or opportunities as I prefer to call them. So when we looked at our growing global presence and how we might deliver our platform across the globe, we quickly realized that we really couldn't keep doing things the way we had been doing them. The same way we had done things isn't going to work to get to where we want to go. So what got us here won't get us there. And we had to start considering the public cloud as a viable option. But that's a complex scenario when you think about combining your private cloud and this public cloud. We couldn't move everything we had all at once, and we realized that the private way of doing things was going to be a dying dinosaur, if you will. But some of those challenges are, have you ever tried to stand up a data center in a foreign country? And it's difficult, so we had to come up with a solution for that. Also, who's done this before us? What are some of the difficulties with having a hybrid cloud? And what's worked for the people who have done this before? And what we've learned is that without any real established best practices in the industry at the time, we had to figure this out. And so we decided to make a partnership with BMC and AWS to help make that journey smoother. Some of the other challenges that we had was that we were recognizing a customer base that was growing faster than the infrastructure that we could create, which is a good problem to have, but it's still a problem. And we're also, the recognition of this international expansion also had customers come up in more diverse locations. And like I had mentioned earlier, it's difficult to build a data center in a foreign country, and it isn't a fast, it's not fast doing it stateside, let alone doing it overseas. And we also want to try to keep our costs down and get the most of our investment while minimizing our downtime. So I'd like to stress that, from my perspective, monitoring for the sake of monitoring is of little to no value. Monitoring has to be done with a purpose, and that to me is about feedback. And your monitoring should provide actionable feedback to be useful. And as we looked at the challenges in the public cloud and some of the challenges we were facing, as we considered the substantial investment we had made in our products and services, as well as the investment we had made in our infrastructure, and we had decided to make another investment, and this time we decided to make an investment in BMC. And ultimately, we decided to go with BMC because their solutions included monitoring, capacity management, ITSM, and that's what I would consider a fully integrated portfolio. And it provided a way for us to create this actionable feedback, or this meaningful monitoring, if you will. Some of the other considerations that helped us choose BMC were that they had a roadmap and the vision for the future. They offered tools with real-time capabilities, and we felt that we needed those real-time capabilities as we moved into AWS. And it didn't hurt that we had staff that was skilled with BMC and had experience with the tools and with the companies so we had a history there. So here's a quote from my boss, the Vice President of Cloud Operations. And when it comes to the importance of monitoring, what really made this important to us, or what makes this a strength for us, is that we have the centralized management, or centralized reporting, if you will. And as you've heard it referred to already once today, and I like to call it a single pane of glass view of our health of our infrastructure. And for my boss, this provides real value, and I would argue that for the enterprise, it provides real value as well as to our customers. So our journey, or our digital transformation, is still happening. I believe as technology changes that this transformation will continue. And I really don't think digital transformation is something you do once. In regards to our transformation, though, these are some of the considerations that we we felt we needed to take into consideration things that we needed to accomplish to make the significant progress in our transformation. And I like this quote from Darwin, that it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor is it the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. And to me, that's what digital transformation symbolizes. This is also part of a maturation process, if you will, in your organization. You start with basic monitoring, you introduce, maybe you layer on capacity management, you mature from basic monitoring to services-oriented monitoring, and so on. And then you also have transformations from a private cloud to a public cloud, from waterfall or cascade project management or agile development to DevOps and CI/CD. And then you sprinkle in this automation, which I think is new to us for sure, and I think it's going to help us to be more successful in the long run. So to paint a complete picture, you kind of have to know where we came from to know where we're going and how we got to where we're at. And our journey started years ago with we had columns of alerting or of monitoring. We had a patrol agent running on our server endpoints. We had network being monitored by a network tool. We had voice being monitored in a separate tool. And these were all distinct columns, if you will. We had capacity management that was standalone. It was done manually. There was no integration into our reporting or into our alerting. We had disjointed implementation of ITSM, and it was all being done. We were monitoring our infrastructure, but there was no, if somebody wasn't logged into a console, if somebody didn't catch the alerts, it was chaotic, and sometimes things got missed. And so what we found was that bringing it all together through TrueSight operations management gave us that single pane of glass view to integrate all our products to. Now alerts come to TrueSight from all of our other tools in the enterprise. Incidents are reported from all areas of our monitoring. We discover components that are added to our CMDB. Our ITSM tools can create tickets against these alerts. And this is all tied together in our infrastructure now. It ties this whole view together in one spot. And what we get from that is it leads to actionable feedback. And like I stated earlier, monitoring is about feedback. It's providing feedback to developers, engineers, the techies, whoever needs this information, and this is where the real value comes in for us. And so regarding our public cloud journey, it's really a multi-phased approach. And the first thing that we did was kind of dipped our toe into the AWS world. I mean, it's in and of itself a big world, and it's new to us. So, like I say, we tried the lift and shift model first. We took our monolithic infrastructure and we moved a portion of that into the public cloud. And there were no significant changes into how we ran the business or how we did our monitoring. Our strategy for monitoring was the same. We were basically putting an agent on a VM, and we were pulling that information back into our TrueSight operations single pane of glass. But as we moved into phase 2 of this approach, and we start leveraging more of the rich features that AWS offers, like microservices or Lambda, it presents a different challenge from a monitoring perspective, because again, how do we get that information? This isn't an endpoint. We can't install an agent on it. We can't just pull the data back by installing an agent on the function. It just doesn't work that way. So we had to change our monitoring strategy and the entire monitoring model, for that matter. We started to develop our products with monitoring in mind. We created alerts and feedback in code that we deploy. If there's a problem with an application, it can now call functions that we wrote in AWS, and that can send alerts to BMC via event monitoring. We no longer monitor endpoints. We now monitor streams of data. We have custom metrics in AWS that we monitor with Pulse real time. And all of this, again, what we get from this is a complete telemetry and feedback loop in a single pane of glass. This is kind of the overarching view of our infrastructure today, if you will, from a flow perspective. And holistically, again, all things point to TrueSight. You might notice in the slide that we have a dynamic baselining, and this has been a real value add for us because now we can detect things in our environment that change or deviate from a baseline. It's not just detecting a threshold that's violated or waiting until the CPU reaches a certain value. This is a much more proactive approach, and this adds value to our DevOps teams as well as to our customers because we aren't waiting for something to happen or waiting for an alert to become critical. We're looking for deviations outside of the norm. And this is an enterprise approach from my perspective, and it's a much more mature approach to monitoring. But again, I'd like to emphasize that at the center of all this is TrueSight. But you know, we can talk about having an enterprise-grade solution, but I think everybody wants to talk about results. I mean, great. What does that get you? What does this way of monitoring get you? And what has gotten us is a MTTR reduction of 70%. And that results, that means happier customers, that means more money in our pockets, that means less credits paid for downtime. That means that we can do work in other areas and not worry about fixing problems all the time or trying to find them. We know what they are now and we can resolve them faster. We have a lot of automated alerts now that happen from the time an error condition is detected to the time an engineer is notified occur within 5 seconds. So from detection to notification in 5 seconds, which is phenomenal for us. We had 6 consecutive quarters with no capital spend for hardware because of the capacity management tools that we implemented and the improved visibility and forecasting capabilities within those tools. And this all equates, again, like I say, to more uptime, less spend, and it makes your boss happier too, which was important for me. And again, the other thing that this does for us is it really allows us to focus on what matters in our environment. And to me, things like process improvement. Some of those process improvements include changing from, again, agile or even waterfall types of project delivery to CI/CD processes. It allows us to work on projects versus unplanned work, which is, again, a big boon for the business as well and for IT operations. Who wants to waste time in areas where they don't have to? And so, again, this is the overall kind of view of our infrastructure, and this was our approach to our migration, if you will, to public cloud and changing our monitoring strategy and partnering with BMC and AWS. You know, again, it's a multi-phased approach. And this is what's worked for us. And indications are that this could be considered a best practice. It might not be for everybody, but indications are this is a good method to try your migration. And again, we started with the lift and shift. This was a like-for-like approach. It's using the similar monolithic approach by using EC2 instances and VMs and running an agent on that, pulling that data back into your console and your TrueSight console, and it's the same thing as just extending your data center, but you're in the public cloud. And then phase 2 for us is we introduce some services, but we're really trying to decouple all those services from the monolith, and we're decreasing our VM footprint. You're using more of Docker, more of Lambda. You're using more of those elastic block stores. You're moving away from endpoint management and getting into streaming of data instead of the traditional endpoint. And in this case, this is where we introduced the usage of the BMC AWS KM for anybody who uses BMC. This is the knowledge module that plugs us into AWS and allows us to pull these streams of data, these metrics from a non-traditional endpoint method. And then in phase 3, you'll see a shift from some services to mostly services with a very small VM and Amazon EC2 footprint. So you'll leverage those elastic compute features. You'll leverage Lambda and microservices and get the most out of that. And I think that one of the critical points in this is that from a capacity perspective, you're no longer monitoring or managing the growth of your infrastructure from a compute perspective, but from a cost perspective. And this is one of those paradigm changes that has to occur when moving to AWS, because you're still going to have expenses, but you have to manage the cost versus the capital. And phase 4 for us is going to be after we've mastered our processes, we're going to introduce more and more automation. We've got some automation today, and you have to automate in order to be able to be successful in this model. And the critical areas, we have automation in today, but we'd like to get more of it. And our plan is to do that with BMC Blade Logic. But equally important to the approach we took, and what I'd like to emphasize, is that at the center of it all is BMC TrueSight for us. That's our single pane of glass. My perspective is that it's a complete view of our services, regardless of where it's hosted. It doesn't matter what technology we use to run it on, and it's all a single pane of glass. And so that's our story so far, and emphasis on so far. And I think we've got a lot more exciting things happening as our journey continues. But with that, I'll turn the time back to Michael. And thanks for your time.
In summary, BMC TrueSight helps enterprise customers maximize IT investments. That includes controlling costs, getting visibility into your environments, managing performance through monitoring and logging of operational data, and securing and automating functions across hybrid architecture. BMC TrueSight offers machine learning to enable enterprise-class monitoring and logging, event management, and operational analytics data, a unified view of health and performance of your hybrid IT infrastructure, telemetry data to help reverse engineer solutions to real issues, reliable automation for key business functions, and real-time SaaS-based monitoring for web-scale apps and infrastructure. Those features include dynamic baselines, multivariate anomaly detection, probable cause analysis, log analytics, statistical metric modeling, and business process automation. Now we'll move to your questions. So the first question is for Seth with BMC. Seth, can you say more about what you mean about using services and business context?
Sure. Thank you, Michael, and thanks for the question. So when one of the key tenets for TrueSight and one of the core focuses for BMC as far as taking approach to IT operations is creating context. So as Dennis mentioned, telemetry data, events, metrics, logs, without context is just, it's not information, it's not actionable. So one of the core tenets we have a tool called Discovery, and it's the industry-leading discovery tool for both data center and AWS public cloud assets. So we do full 100% discovery, not just of assets themselves, but we discover the relationships between assets. So we can build a model showing how individual pieces of the infrastructure are connected to build out a service view or an application view. And what that allows you to do is essentially group the activity in your environment. So say, for example, you have event storm or alerts happening in a particular area. The context allows you to identify which business services are impacted and create actually to get a sense of what the severity of the impact is. So it helps you prioritize where to put your attention and resources. And that's just it's foundational to our approach that we believe in context like this, and that we help build it. And the building is done automatically. So we have customers that, that every day essentially rediscover all of their assets and relationships on a daily basis. You can do it more frequently than that or less frequently as your business needs necessitate. And then that flows automatically through the integrations that Dennis talked about into both the service desk and the monitoring tools. So there's essentially no need for manual intervention to build out that context that allows you to prioritize, measure severity, and route issues to the appropriate response teams.
Hey, thanks, Seth. This question is for Dennis. How does monitoring change as you start to utilize AWS?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks for asking that. First off, from my experience, you don't have control of these environments anymore. You have control of the content and what goes on them, but you don't have control of the environment. So right out of the gate, monitoring is a little different. I'd say that the second concept, second to this is the whole concept of serverless. Again, this is kind of new, at least to me. So when you monitor servers or EC2 instances, it's the same game. You put an agent out there and you pull that data back. But what do you do for a serverless environment? This is a real opportunity to innovate, as far as we see it, and that was the way we approached it. Let's look at this as an opportunity to innovate and change how we develop and implement code. You should also have a monitoring in mind, though, when you're developing that code. You should really try to consider changing from the endpoint data collection to streaming data collection. That's a consideration, and you have to be really discerning over what metrics or KPIs you want, because it really matters. It matters, and when you design this, you want to design to get those KPIs. So what it boils down to is you really want to have a monitoring strategy, and companies like BMC can help you develop that strategy.
Thanks, Dennis. This next question is for Seth. Seth, can you share more about cost management strategies?
Sure. We've had a lot of, there's kind of an emerging category. So think about it this way. The traditional approach to capacity planning and capacity management in the data center was you had a CapEx model where you were doing capital expenditures on, let's call it a 3-year cycle, for example, or an annual cycle. And the goal was to forecast what you were going to need over that period of time, and you purchased the appropriate assets, or you scheduled a purchasing program to try to scale appropriately. And in a situation like that, the penalty for over provisioning resources was relatively minor, assuming that you eventually got around to using them appropriately. At least you had planned properly and you didn't experience under provisioning. But the reality is very few people can anticipate what they're going to be needing in 3 years. And so the industry research suggests that something like 30% of servers are what they call comatose, essentially unused, and 40% of storage is unused. Now, what happens when you move to AWS is you move from a CapEx model to an OpEx model, meaning you're now no longer, your infrastructure as code, essentially, or the AWS resources that you consume. Yes, you pay as you go, and you pay for only what you need. That's correct. And you get a monthly bill, so you're no longer capital expenditure, it's more subscription based. And that's the power of AWS. However, the penalty for under or over provisioning is now significantly different and more severe. And so, for example, if you over provision an AWS instance, for example, then instead of the one-time payment that it then sits in your data center and depreciates, you're now overpaying every month for the fact that you don't know exactly how much you need. And so the model for cost management, or cloud expense management, as the analysts are starting to call it, is you have to actually actively monitor all of your Amazon services and balance the cost that you're paying with the performance that you need at any given time. So if you want to take advantage of auto scaling, if you want to take advantage of the elasticity that you get from the cloud, then you need to understand exactly what the utilization of your business services is, and create the appropriate consumption of resources in AWS to match that. And so what happens is you move from a planning, and you still have planning activities that you need to do for your heritage resources, but now operations needs to become, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, stay on top of utilization as well as consumption of services in AWS. And what we're finding, just to give you some feedback on that, is that customers are, especially, let's talk about the lift and shift scenario where you're moving an existing heritage workload from data center to a cloud. Understanding what is doing a mapping and saying, do I need a T2 micro or T2 macro or T1 or T3 or whatever, for example, what resources do I need, and how do I make a like-for-like match with AWS for what I'm using now? Well, to do that, you need to understand what you're running it on now. You need to understand what the utilization is now, as well as peak. And you have to be sure that you understand the complete application or service delivery context. So you don't want to just look at one piece of a service delivery and say, oh, this application is part of a value chain that includes 7 applications. If I move this application from here to AWS, what's the impact going to be on performance? You need to look at the entire service delivery model for all those 7 applications that fit in and think about how they interact and build that service context I talked about earlier. So service context, utilization, as well as a cloud migration kind of what if scenario or modeling scenario where you can say which AWS services do I need and how big do they need to be? And it's just a very different paradigm because it's a different way of modeling and doing capacity and cost management. And this is an area, I'll just tell you, we're seeing explosive growth in interest in our cloud expense solution as well as our traditional capacity solution, because customers are kind of coming back to, it's back to the future, right? You've always needed to do this. It became sort of less of a priority over the last, say, 5 to 7 years, and now it's starting to get hot again. So I highly encourage customers to get out there and do the research on that cloud expense management portion and think carefully about migration strategies and where they are now before they make the plan to jump.
Thanks. This next question is for Dennis. Dennis, thanks for information about NICE InContact. Can you share a bit more about what systems you moved?
Yeah, so we basically moved everything that supports the omni-channel routing portion of our infrastructure, and that's we basically the compute infrastructure to back those voice capabilities we put into the cloud, a public cloud. The voice components or the voice switches and things like that, those stayed in our private data centers, our private cloud data centers, but the compute behind all of that was what we did for the lift and shift. So we have like for like, and that to me when we talked about lift and shift, that's a great distinguishing characteristic. It wasn't absolutely everything that we have went into AWS. Some things just it doesn't make sense to put there right now, or we're still trying to figure out how we might go about doing that. But the brains or the intelligence or the compute behind all of this is what we're running a like for like in AWS. I hope that answers the question.
Makes sense. Seth, there's a question for you. It says, how are you going to integrate AWS with BMC TrueSight? How are 2 different systems communicating with each other?
Great question. There's actually multiple modalities that you can take. So there's essentially 3 different modalities, and it really depends on the use case. So the first use case is leveraging CloudWatch. So essentially, we have connectors that will pull all the information, the telemetry, both for performance as well as billing from your AWS at the account level. So, I don't know if you're familiar with how CloudWatch works, but it's through an API integration, our systems will automatically discover all of the instances and services that you have in a specific AWS account or multiple AWS accounts. We can then consume any CloudWatch metrics that are being delivered from those services and instances, as well as the billing model, and pull that into our monitoring and our capacity management or our solution. So that's use case one. And then use case two that Dennis mentioned is for instances and services where you want that high fidelity monitoring. We have the ability to leverage either an agent model where if it's, for an example, an instance, we have a super lightweight agent that can deliver telemetry directly into the TrueSight monitoring platform from the instance. Or, as Dennis mentioned, he was talking about streaming. The model that we have, we can essentially put a tap into or get a window on the streaming telemetry that's coming out of instances, or monitor endpoints agentless by using features like ping and HTTP check and things like that, keep alive. So we have a variety of different strategies, and it just depends on the criticality of the service that you're delivering as to what level of fidelity you want. And then, are you interested in understanding your entire AWS account or just a subset of it? How important is the billing information? And we support all those different ones, but how customers implement it is, I think you saw in the case of NICE InContact, they actually do both use cases for different services.
Thanks, Seth. Another question. With AWS innovating so quickly, how can customers and partners possibly expect to keep up? The customers we talk to at AWS love our pace of innovation. It's one of the key reasons they choose AWS over other cloud providers. We do have several training and support offerings for our customers to help them ramp up on new services, ranging from training and certifications to boot camps to events like the Global Summit Series and reInvent, to direct interaction with AWS through a technical account manager, a solutions architect, or AWS professional services. There are also hundreds of system integrators to help customers deploy and manage new solutions. This question is for Dennis at NICE InContact. Dennis, what are some of the challenges you experienced with migrating to AWS, and how did you address them?
It's a tough one. I have to say probably one of the biggest challenges, or maybe I guess changes for us, is how are we going to do capacity management in the public cloud? We kind of mastered that principle or practice in the private cloud, but when we talk about serverless computing again, and Lambda functions, microservices, and all these great things that AWS offers, how do you do capacity planning for that? And so that presented a challenge, and I'd say that was the biggest one. And so it's a shift in my mind from capital expenditure, which is generally fixed. You operate within that budget, and you have to stay within that. Now we're in an operating expense that has a potential of growing out of control if you don't manage it correctly. And what we're learning is that it's all about cost control in the public cloud. You need a good way to capture that. You need a good way to track and report it. And most importantly, you have to be able to forecast your workloads in the public cloud. I think there's a lot of potential for costs to get out of control, but there's also an equal amount of potential for your cost savings. If you do it right and you have good capacity management and control capabilities, I think that's the key. And that was and is a challenge that we're still developing and working through, but we're starting to get our arms around it a little better.
Thanks, Seth. This question is for you. Are web services or SOAP XML protocols used to integrate?
Sorry, I was on mute. The answer is yes. If you're talking about integration to AWS, we leverage the AWS API and do a direct secure API integration.
Thanks, Seth. So for next steps and further information, check out BMC on the AWS Marketplace. Just go to aws.amazon.com/marketplace and search for BMC. For more information on BMC TrueSight, see bmc.com/partners/awsmanagement.html. And to learn more about DevOps on AWS, see aws.amazon.com/DevOps. And finally, try AWS at aws.amazon.com. Thank you, everyone.